The men that the hitman had murdered weren't just anybody. They were all world-renowned assassins. But when faced with Joe, the greatest assassin in Europe, having even more of them wouldn't matter. Yet it was Joe himself who brought disaster upon himself. He had put out a contract on his own life, inviting all the assassins in the world to come and take his head. Initially, Joe had no intention of resisting. 2 million would easily belong to anyone who completed the mission. But a sudden incident made him change his mind, and it all had to do with a woman. A few days earlier, a contemporary art performance was taking place in an opera house. A tycoon was sitting in the VIP room, quietly enjoying the show. Outside, bodyguards were patrolling. One of them was checking his appearance in a mirror. Suddenly, out of the corner of his eye, he saw a black leather shoe peeking out from under the curtain. His heart tightened. He tiptoed over and yanked the curtain open. Joe appeared, his eyes as still as a frozen lake. He turned his back and walked straight toward the target's room, pretending to be on the phone. A bodyguard at the end of the hallway stepped forward to block him. Before he could react, Joe raised his hand and fired. The silenced gun made only a muffled thud sound, and the bodyguard quietly collapsed onto the carpet. When he pulled back the curtain and entered, the target turned his head and, upon seeing Joe, immediately understood that he couldn't escape death. He hastily offered 3 times the original price to beg for his life, but only received the reply, "That's not how the game is played," and then Joe pulled the trigger. The woman who had been with him was terrified. Joe signaled for her to be quiet. The woman hurriedly ran out, bumping into the bodyguard guarding the door. The bodyguard took out his walkie-talkie to call his teammates, but only static came through the receiver. He then realized that his other 2 teammates had gone silent long ago. When he pushed open the door, he only saw his boss slumped on the table. Joe turned to leave when, suddenly, a sharp pain shot through his temple. Everything in front of him began to blur. He had to cling to the wall to try to stand. On the other side, the bodyguard ran into the hallway and was immediately stopped by the theater's security staff, who suspected him. Without a word, he drew his gun and shot the security staff, then rushed into a room and jumped onto the stage. But before he could stand firm, a bullet from the upper level pierced him, causing him to collapse in the middle of the stage. The entire auditorium immediately erupted. The shouts and screams were like a tidal wave, overwhelming the opera house. A ballerina named Lucy was knocked down by the panicked crowd. Thousands of feet stomped chaotically around her as she was nearly swallowed by fear. A strong hand picked her up. It wasn't until she was placed down at the emergency exit behind the theater that Lucy clearly saw the man who had carried her. A chiseled face, a faint scar on his eyebrow, and eyes that held a weariness she couldn't understand. She was just about to ask his name when Joe suddenly felt a splitting headache. Lucy wanted to ask passersby if anyone had painkillers, but when she turned back, the man had disappeared into the night. When Joe returned home, the dizziness still hadn't subsided. He reached for his bottle of painkillers, but his fingertips touched a cold object. It was a pink phone, the lock screen showing a ballerina. He must have put it in his pocket when he carried Lucy. The next day, Joe went to the hospital for an MRI. The doctor shook his head, pointed to the scan, and said that the brain temporarily showed no signs of disease. But his work definitely involved hard knot, some soft tissue damage, or nerve compression. The MRI couldn't detect it. The doctor advised him that it was time to reconsider his lifestyle. Joe said nothing, left a tube of blood, and left. He turned to meet his boss, Ken. The apartment was filled with the smell of cigars. Joe said that he had gone to see a doctor. A flash of worry crossed Ken's eyes, but Joe reassured him that there was nothing to worry about. He went on to talk about how he was starting to question why he was killing people. Ken said that the targets were all cruel and ruthless villains, so he was basically acting as God's agent. Joe, upon hearing this, asked what people would think of him after he died. Ken replied that that was God's business. Our job is to send those scumbags to meet God. Joe nodded and received the 500 reward for this mission. Ken advised him to take some time off, not to forget about life because of work. Hearing this, he remembered that pink phone. Another scene appeared. The figure of Lucy spinning on the glass of the dance studio. Joe stood silently at the door, waiting for her to stop before approaching and returning the phone. Lucy's eyes lit up, her cheeks flushed. She said she was very grateful for what had happened yesterday and wanted to invite him to dinner. Joe was about to refuse when Lucy took out a photo, writing her phone number on the back. Leaving the studio, Joe clutched the photo and threw it in the trash. But after only a few steps, he stopped, turned around, and picked the photo back up from the trash. In the evening, Joe sat by the window, facing the phone screen. He typed, then deleted, finally sending a message. "Are you free tonight?" As night fell, in a candlelit restaurant, Lucy smiled brightly, telling interesting stories from the dance troupe. Joe listened, a rare smile blooming on his face. Lucy said that since she was little, she had dreamed of dancing ballet, and to have enough money for lessons. Her mother had worked 2 jobs every day without a word of complaint. So ballet wasn't just a hobby for her. Joe also confessed that he was an orphan. At the age of 18, he received his draft notice and entered the military. Now, he still did the same job, but in his heart, he had long intended to retire. The conversation between the two became comfortable and strangely harmonious. Without knowing when, their eyes became more human. In the days that followed, the two began dating frequently. Joe spent his free time handling a few remaining missions, almost always by Lucy's side. They were immersed in close, inseparable love. Everything continued like this, seemingly about to lead to marriage, when a surprise came. The blood test results were in. Joe had a terminal illness that would gradually destroy his neurological function. For an assassin, losing the ability to control his nerves was almost synonymous with the end of his career. What was even more cruel was that this disease had no precedent for a cure, and he only had a maximum of 3 months to live. The doctor's words hit Joe like an iceberg. He couldn't accept this result. He had just found the person he wanted to live with for the rest of his life, yet now he had to face a predetermined separation. His heart was filled with powerlessness. Leaving the hospital, Joe drove home. He searched for information about this disease online. Hundreds of thousands of patients worldwide, but not a single case has been cured. He only had 3 months to live. Thinking of this, Joe took out his gun. But when he saw the photo of him and Lucy embracing on his phone, he felt that he needed to do something before he left. So he went to see his boss, Ken. For Joe, Ken wasn't just a boss, but also like a relative, a teacher, and a friend. When Ken heard Joe tell him about his illness, he was also extremely shocked. He didn't expect things to be so serious. Joe, as if he had made up his mind, took out a portion of his savings and asked Ken to help him buy an accident insurance policy with Lucy as the beneficiary. However, accident insurance didn't cover suicide or natural death. Therefore, he was willing to pay Ken to hire an assassin to kill him. Ken looked at Joe as if looking at his own son. Though he couldn't give him hope, he didn't want to do something so cruel. Emotions were invisible, yet sometimes they could cause people pain in the bone marrow. Joe understood Ken's thoughts, said nothing more, stood up, and left his place. He turned his back and walked in a different direction. That place was the home of Bella, his sworn enemy of many years. As soon as they met, Joe said he wanted to sign a contract with him. Bella introduced Joe to his henchman, Mike, and said that Joe was the top assassin in Europe. Then Joe explained his purpose. He was willing to pay $2 million to find someone to kill him. Bella was stunned upon hearing this. She didn't expect the person she had always wanted to eliminate to actively make this request. Without thinking, she immediately agreed. The two arranged to begin the mission after midnight. After speaking, Joe turned and left. As soon as Joe left, Bella eagerly announced the hunt. Because Joe was a tough opponent, Bella specifically chose a team of assassins who were among the best in the world, determined to take Joe down from the first round. After arranging everything, Joe didn't go home but went to the opera house to wait for Lucy to get off work. The two met and were still as affectionate as before. Happiness shone from their eyes, and all those moments were recorded by Mike, Bella's henchman, using his phone. After a few short stories, Lucy realized that Joe seemed to have something on his mind. She wanted to know what had happened to him, but unexpectedly, Joe directly said goodbye, saying that he needed to rethink what he really wanted. Lucy said that Joe was talking nonsense because, clearly, the two could bring happiness to each other. Clearly, they loved each other deeply, but from Joe's attitude, she realized that he was determined. After kissing him, she turned and walked away without looking back. Joe was extremely distressed but could only watch Lucy leave. It seemed that that was the only thing he could do. Soon after, Joe returned home. He didn't lock the door. He even turned on all the lights. After a few shots of hard liquor, he mustered the courage to send Lucy a voice message. It was a farewell monologue, explaining that he was forced to break up because he had a serious illness, and saying that Lucy was the person he had been searching for his whole life. Lucy, who was immersed in pain, immediately saw Joe's voice message. Just as she was listening, Joe received a call from his private doctor. The doctor informed Joe that he didn't have any illness at all. It was a mistake by the testing center staff. They had confused his file with another patient's. Joe asked about his headaches and double vision. The doctor said that the cause was unclear and asked if he had checked his eyes, as it could be due to the nerves around his eyes causing the headaches. At this time, there were only 5 minutes left until the hunt began. Joe was extremely worried. At the same time, the first team of assassins had arrived below his building. It was a team of all Koreans, known for their brutal and ostentatious style. After each mission, the scene was often filled with many deaths, with many different methods, and the weapons they used were also extremely diverse. Because Joe didn't lock the door, they easily entered the room. Joe said that this was a mistake and wanted to cancel the contract, but the assassins were only interested in the money. After the leader gave the order, the hunt officially began. The assassin wearing red made a flashy move but was knocked down by Joe. Then Joe's shoulder was slashed. Joe immediately confronted the female assassin wielding an axe. He didn't expend too much effort. With just a series of moves, he quickly subdued her. The assassin wearing red saw this and lost control of his emotions. But before absolute strength, anger and screams were useless, even accelerating his death. Immediately afterward, the leader ordered his companions to continue attacking with samurai swords. As a result, the sword had not even touched Joe when it was knocked away by a blow. Then the red-haired girl with the strange weapon stepped forward. She looked very fierce, and her weapon strikes were also powerful, even slashing Joe's shoulder. But when Joe counterattacked, she couldn't withstand even a single blow. Having dealt with all his companions, the leader remained calm, constantly mocking and provoking. However, what no one expected was that he was the weakest. He had not even had time to attack when Joe used the blue curved knife on his shoulder to slash straight into his face. After finishing, Joe lit a cigarette for himself. At this time, the red-haired girl was not completely dead, staggering to her feet. That's it. Joe easily took out the entire team of assassins ranked 3rd in the world. Afterward, Joe called Bella, offering to cancel the contract and willingly give Bella the $2 million without requiring reimbursement. But Bella refused because Joe had killed her father years ago. Now that she finally had the opportunity to eliminate Joe, she didn't want to give it up. She even threatened to gather all the strongest assassins in Europe to fight Joe to the death. Just after hanging up the phone, Joe was chased by 2 men on motorcycles. They used their vehicles as weapons, driving straight at him without a word. At first, Joe was a little flustered. One of them even mocked him, saying this wasn't a personal grudge. It was just a business deal. Joe knew that fighting on the ground was disadvantageous to him. He picked up a steel bar, hid behind a barrel, and directly knocked one man off his bike, then stomped his head to a pulp. Seeing his companion die, the remaining man went berserk. Having dealt with him, the Moto brothers immediately ran towards Ken's house. Bella, meanwhile, had raised the reward to $4 million and issued a global warrant. Even top assassins who had previously feared Joe were now hooked by the $4 million. Joe quickly arrived at Ken's house. He bandaged Joe's wounds. Ken's wife stepped forward and offered to set his bones. She had previously apprenticed at a bone-setting shop in Chinatown. Her hand strength was both precise and steady. Ken stood beside her, anxiously, afraid she would accidentally break Joe's neck. Joe suddenly cried out, but not because of pain. The throbbing temples that had been plaguing him suddenly became quiet. The light in front of his eyes was no longer overlapping, and even the dizziness of the past few days had vanished. He couldn't believe it, embracing her tightly. The dizziness and vertigo that had tormented him for so long had finally disappeared. On Bella's side, she called the assassin Love separately, preparing to help him. She sent Love a picture of Lucy. This was the trump card to control Joe, but this help wasn't free. Bella had a grandson who was about to enter the assassin business, and she hoped Love would guide him. However, upon meeting, he found that this grandson was just a hip-hop playing kid who talked a lot. On the other side, Lucy received a call from Joe. He told her to quickly find a place to hide, because both of them were unsafe. He said that he would come to her after he had resolved everything. Although Lucy didn't understand why she had to hide, she listened to Joe and went home to pack her things. At this time, her phone rang again. It was a message from the bank. The number 500 on the screen dazzled her. Without thinking too much, Lucy hurriedly took her things out of the house. But as soon as she stepped out, she saw a huge man blocking the door. On the other side was a skinny guy. Love said that Joe had told him to pick up his girlfriend, but Lucy knew that she couldn't trust anyone now. Joe had chosen a final battle location. He even borrowed some explosives from Ken, then immediately drove to an abandoned ancient castle. It was the place where Ken had performed his final mission. Located deep in the jungle, surrounded by ruined factories and broken walls, it truly was a living coffin. He deliberately revealed his whereabouts, preparing to end everything here. But Bella was even more cruel. She directly called Mike to summon mercenaries. Joe could take down a few arrogant guys with knives, but could he defeat an entire fully armed army? The assassins, on their way, quickly received the information. After reading the content, all couldn't hide their excitement, pressed the accelerator harder, and sped towards the castle. Joe was busy setting traps with explosives. He hid explosives in discreet places and hid the wires on the hallway floor. Each step was calculated for the correct angle. Soon after, the first team of assassins stormed into the castle, raising their guns warily. Joe recognized the commotion and immediately threw a grenade. A curse mixed with an explosion rang out. Joe jumped downstairs, fighting 2 assassins. Although he took down one, Joe found it a bit difficult against the skinny assassin. When the 2 brothers began to coordinate, his situation became even more difficult. Seeing Joe being overwhelmed, the 2 brothers became even more arrogant. But Joe calmly pulled the trap switch, successfully using a bullhorn to kill one of them. Seeing his brother killed, the remaining brother immediately went berserk. 1-on-2 might be difficult, but 1-on-1 wasn't anything to be afraid of. He quickly dealt with his opponent. Just as he caught his breath, 2 other female assassins attacked. Joe dodged bullets as he retreated. The 2 girls continuously threw grenades, covering him with dust. The 2 sides immediately engaged in a fierce gunfight. Seeing that Joe was out of bullets, 1 female assassin prepared to approach. Joe hurriedly pulled the woman who had fallen into a corner due to the explosion, pulled the pin on the grenade on her body and threw her out with all his might. Blasted out of the corridor by the explosion, Joe met another assassin, a dancer. The 2 immediately engaged. This assassin reacted quickly, her moves agile, like a dancer performing powerful steps. Joe was momentarily a little flustered, but thanks to his superior physique, His opponent still couldn't really overwhelm him. Seeing that their strength was equal, the two decided to fight with swords. Joe, with the advantage of his home turf, after a fierce battle, finally took down this dancer assassin. Just then, Joe's phone suddenly rang. The screen displayed an incoming call from Lucy. However, the voice on the other end was that of the assassin Love. He had also arrived and had a very straightforward request. Use Lucy to threaten him to kill Joe and get the 4 million. Joe decided to use himself to exchange for Lucy's safety. However, before Joe could finish speaking, Mike led a team of mercenaries. Joe immediately prepared himself. The team of mercenaries launched a surprise attack inside the mansion. Little did they know that Joe had already dug a grave for them. It had to be admitted that this team of mercenaries was quite professional. They discovered the tripwire under their feet, but they didn't expect that the bombs could also be detonated remotely. The remaining mercenaries didn't stop, continuing to approach. Joe seized the opportunity, quickly taking down one and stealing his weapon, then successfully escaped through the tunnel. Love was waiting at the tunnel exit. Joe knew Lucy was in his hands, so he obediently threw down his weapons. Love took out his phone, preparing to tell his men to bring Lucy over. But unexpectedly, Lucy had previously realized that the kid watching her wasn't very bright. She pretended to have a numb leg and wanted to get out of the car and walk around a bit. The kid didn't think much and let her out. Lucy intentionally fell next to a stick, taking advantage of the kid's carelessness. She grabbed the stick, knocked him unconscious, stole the car, and sped toward the mansion. Just as Love was impatiently yelling into the phone, a car suddenly rushed over, crashing straight into him. Love was knocked dizzy and lay flat on the ground, unable to move. Lucy hurriedly shouted for Joe to get in the car. Seeing this, Mike fired randomly but still let the two escape. At this time, the kid approached Love, explaining the reason, then said that perhaps he wasn't suited for this profession. Love and Mike met. Love said that 4 million wasn't enough. He wanted 6 million. Mike said he would report to his superiors. On the road, Joe told Lucy everything that had happened recently, his identity as an assassin, Bella's hunt, all the battles and struggles. Lucy listened, her hands gripping the steering wheel tightly. The person she had been in love with for so long was actually an assassin. Joe hurriedly explained that he only killed bad people and had already retired. Unexpectedly, Lucy said that it was great, because she didn't want to have a child with an assassin. She went on to say that she was pregnant. A few nights ago, she had intended to tell Joe, but that night he had asked to break up. Joe was startled. He was just about to say something when Lucy suddenly collapsed in the passenger seat. He hurriedly took over the steering wheel, pulled the car over to the side of the road. It was only then that he discovered she had been shot in the shoulder. Thankfully, the wound wasn't deep. Joe carried her into a nearby church. Just as he was about to find something to treat the wound, a pastor walked out of the room. Seeing Lucy lying on the floor, the pastor was just about to help when she suddenly opened her eyes. The fainting spell just now was just the body's self-defense mechanism. Seeing that Lucy was all right, Joe suddenly got down on one knee and proposed to her. The person officiating the wedding was, of course, the pastor in front of them. But the pastor had one request. Joe had to confess his sins, no matter how urgent the time. He had to make time for confession. So, the two sat down in the confessional booth. Joe began to list his missions and the ways he had killed people recently, leaving the pastor dumbfounded. In all his years of practice, he had never heard such bizarre sins. But in the end, he still forgave Joe and instructed him never to kill again. Joe helplessly said that there might be a few cases of legitimate self-defense later. And so, under the witness of the pastor, their wedding began. When it came time to exchange rings, Joe took out a grenade pin from his pocket, treating it as a wedding ring. However, before they could even finish saying their vows, Love suddenly burst in, raising his hand and firing at Joe. The bullet accidentally hit the pastor. Seeing Joe's lost look, he arrogantly cursed. Before he could finish, a grenade was thrown at Joe's feet. Mike, leading the team of mercenaries, had arrived. He said that the boss didn't want to pay 6 million, so he told him to take care of Love as well. A chaotic battle immediately erupted, and Love and Joe temporarily joined forces, working together to eliminate a few mercenaries. Mike told his subordinates to catch Love, then, regardless of friend or foe, threw 2 grenades, causing his subordinates to be blown to death and Love to be blown away. A nearby shelf also collapsed, burying Love. Mike approached, just about to pull the trigger, when he suddenly felt a chill down his spine. Mike saw that he was out of bullets and began to mock, but in the next second, his head exploded. No one expected that the one who pulled the trigger was Lucy. Joe encouraged her, saying it was okay, but what Lucy cared about was Love lying on the ground. After the battle ended, Bella was packing her luggage, preparing to flee, when Ken suddenly appeared behind her, hiring mercenaries to carry out an assassin's mission. Bella had violated the rules of the Assassin Alliance. The ending that awaited her was just a bullet. Finally, Joe and Lucy returned to that church. They donated money to help the pastor rebuild the church. The two held their wedding in the presence of everyone. Joe completely gave up his gun, washed his hands, and laid down his sword, tightly holding Lucy's hand. The days that followed no longer held pursuits or killings, but only peace and happiness awaiting a new life. Bautista plays a killer who is still worried about performance. He can only take time from his busy schedule to be with his girlfriend. The action scenes are ideational, and the assassination scene in the opera house, the sound of bullets exploding heads, and the ballerina's hair flying up, blend seamlessly. Blood and blood contrasting with the color of the ballet skirt. This type of design is more novel than simple gunfight scenes, but the love line is a bit superfluous. The scene of the male and female assassins fighting and flirting at the same time seems forced. The boss hunts down customers for performance. Assassins take on tasks like working overtime, turning murder into a profession, and actually hides a satire of capitalist society. No matter how special a profession is, it eventually becomes a position that can be replaced. What is more thought-provoking is the attitude towards violence. Joe thinks he is carrying out justice, but the pastor says that murder is murder. Just like in reality, there are people who believe that violence can solve problems, but don't realize that they may have become tools for others. Assassins receiving rewards after killing people. This exposes the reality that violence is being commercialized. The construction of the villain is still simple. Apart from showing off coolness, there is not much depth. They leave the game too early, not creating much conflict. Overall, the film still has bright spots. Although the content is not deep enough, the angle is quite unique, and this is also a pleasing entertainment film. Watching it can still be satisfying. Thank you for watching. What did you think of this movie?